Good morning, everybody. That looked like fun. That was just a beautiful, beautiful kids focus there, Ashley. We're talking about following, and we have been for about 5 weeks now. And today is no exception. But today I want to talk to us a little bit about our intention. Our intention is to follow. But on the journey, naturally, there are things that happen that cause us to be a little bit like Judah was, and we might get distracted and we might let go of the rope for a minute. So today we're going to talk about kind of the space in between following and not following and just how that's naturally part of the journey. So are you with me? Are you awake? Good, excellent. We're going to go fast. Okay, Instagram or Twitter or Facebook or Snapchat or any of the Tumblr, YouTube, any of these kind of social media places always have a button you can click that allows you to follow. That allows you just to go, you know what, I want to see what they're doing. I want to watch this channel on YouTube. I want to follow this person because they're interesting. But just as easy as it is to hit follow, it's equally as easy to when you get a little bit bored or annoyed with somebody, or you don't really like what's going on that channel anymore, just to deselect the same button. We get to hit unfollow just as easily as we get to hit follow. And that might just be a little bit like our journey with God or even our relationships with other people. We might find ourselves going, yeah, no, it was good for a while, I was happy to follow, but I'm about to hit unfollow. You know, there are people that I've unfollowed from my Facebook just because I don't like what they say or I get bored with them. You know, and it's just our tendency out of convenience or out of just our own taste or out of our own consumerism mentality just to hit unfollow as easily as we would hit follow. It's simple, it's easy, and it's quite tempting. So today I want us to talk about the fact that we want to determine whether a follower of Jesus or a fan of Jesus is sometimes about recognizing what the space looks like in between the two. Let's get comfortable with the space between the two. Let's see if we can recognize that. A few weeks ago, we talked about the difference between a fan and a follower and how it might just be our view of the cross. So that's where these came from. We've spoken about the fact that becoming a follower often starts with being a fan first, and that's okay. We have talked about the prerequisite to following, which is being a sinner. So lucky for us, right? That being a sinner is a requirement of being a follower. And there's a beautiful word about Jesus calling people to take up their cross daily. The beautiful word being daily, which means we get a new opportunity every single day. It's a decision that we make. We talked about how to recognize last week, recognize a follower. How would you recognize a follower? What they wear is pretty important. And are we dressed in follow wear today is the question. Norman gave us a little bit of an acronym to remember that by. Do you remember this? Chick, flick, PG. So you got to read it down. So these are the things that we want to get dressed in when it comes to being a follower that has follow wear. Right back at the beginning, we talked about defining the relationship, the DTR conversation. We're going back about 6 weeks now. And in being able to determine where we are, that allows us to recognize where we need to go. So that was the DTR. What's our next step going to be? So we've been on quite the journey, Papster, learning about fans and learning about followers. But truthfully, that's what following is. It's a journey. It's a step-by-step, moment-by-moment, action kind of journey when we're connected to the source or the rope, as we would have it today. So I want us to pop under the microscope today. The intersections that we come to as followers. Those moments when we either re-click the button that says follow or we just hit unfollow. We might do it deliberately, we might do it accidentally, but we find ourselves wondering at these intersections, we find ourselves wondering whether Christ really is enough. Is Jesus really enough for this situation? Or worse yet, we head back down to the fan zone for a while and we get distracted eating popcorn and watching movies and not even really thinking about involving God in the decision at all. But there's this space in between. And our journey actually might look a little bit more like a zigzag than it does a straight line. But that's what relationship is. But let's identify it. Let's look it up. You know, the deliberate or unintentional rogue moments we have in following our agenda or following God's agenda. And sometimes they just don't match up. So we've got heaps of examples. We've got heaps of examples in the Bible of people that declared to be followers of Jesus, that hit maybe a bump in the road, that came to this little intersection that we're talking about. And they're thinking to themselves, do I hit the unfollow button? Is there an eject button here? And in thinking about this, I think it's really, really interesting. I'm going to ask you this question. It's really interesting to think about sometimes why we became a Christian in the first place. If you're a Christian here today, why did you become a follower of Jesus in the first place? If you've been going to church a long time, like me, you might resonate with my story a little bit. I grew up in church. And I think if I'm really honest with you, the reason I clicked the follow button in the first place and became a Christian or became a Christ follower is because I wanted to be saved. You heard people talking about one day Jesus is going to come back. And when he comes back, everyone that's a follower of him is going to go live with him in heaven. Well, let's be honest, the alternative doesn't sound very good. So as little kids in Sabbath school or wherever we are, we go, well, I want to be saved. I want to go to heaven because, what happens if you get stuck here? And so my reason for following was actually to get a reward, was actually to get something out of it in the end. And at that point in time, because I'm a little kid and it's okay, it wasn't necessarily about signing on for a day-to-day relationship with Jesus. I mean, that just came with it, as maturity comes with it. But really, my motive inherently is a little bit selfish. I want to go to heaven. So I'm going to be a follower of Jesus. If I follow this, I get this. It's almost like we could do it at the touch of a button. How convenient. How convenient. An example of this, a real easy example of this, is the hungry crowd. You may have heard about the hungry crowd where Jesus fed thousands of people all at once. Well, the thing is that after he fed them, he left and went somewhere else. And they woke up the next morning and they're wondering where he is. So they follow because they're really curious. And they get to where Jesus is the next day and they find that the all-you-can-eat buffet is closed. And Jesus wasn't going to feed them that day. And so a whole lot of them left. Because they were following Jesus out of curiosity. They're following him to see if they could get some food. They got some food last time. There's a beautiful example of Peter, who is one of Jesus' tight, main guys, one of the disciples. And Peter I love Peter because he's just really, really bold and he's not going to be real secretive about it. Peter just outright asks, God, I've given up a lot to follow you. What do I get out of it? He just blatantly asks. Which is nice. It means we don't have to read between the lines. Are there times, church, when we follow out of curiosity? Are there times when we wonder just whether or not he'll feed us again? Or are we expecting to receive something? Are we a little bit like Peter? Can we just outright ask, what, God, I've given up a lot for you. Where is it? Where are you? When are you coming? And we might just have to flat out own our consumer mentality when it comes to this. Okay, I'll follow, but tell me what I'm going to get for what I give up. There's this disciple that we don't often talk about. And we might assume we actually have him figured out. His name is Judas. You might have heard that name. Sometimes people use it as an insult when they think somebody's not trustworthy or somebody betrays somebody else. They say, you're a Judas. Has a meaning associated with it, not a positive meaning, a betraying, negative kind of meaning. But what we might be stunned to find out today is that there are aspects of Judas's journey that we might be able to relate to. And you know what? Initially, when I thought about this, I'm thinking, I don't want to be like Judas. Judas sucks. He's so mean. Like he had this thing. He was a betrayer. He's got all these negative. We don't want to be a Judas. But I think if we're really honest and we look at Judas's story a little bit closer today, we might be able to find that there are some similarities between us and Judas. So we're going to go there today. Judas is one of Jesus' main guys, and he's infamous or famous for all the wrong things. And Judas' story doesn't really have a happy ending. I'm just going to give that away from the beginning. He saw Jesus the same as the rest of the disciples or the apostles did. Here's what you need to know about Judas. He believed that through Jesus, God was going to deliver and reestablish Israel as the superpower, right? Reestablish Israel as the power of the world, and Rome would be thrown out and the Jewish king would be on the throne. And once again, Palestine and Judah and that whole area of the world would be under the leadership of a Jewish king. That's what Judas thought. That's what he thought Jesus was here to do. Overthrow the current power and take the Jews back into power as the Messiah, as the deliverer. And he and all the disciples actually thought Jesus was that guy because Jesus had such authority. And he made sense. So Judas waited and he watched. And Judas saw Jesus as a little bit of a means to an end. He saw Jesus as a potential rise to power. Judas had ideas on how this would happen. And as Jesus rose to power, Judas was probably thinking, I'm going to rise too. Honestly, it might be fair to say that Judas might have been a little bit bugged by Jesus, a little bit annoyed by Jesus, because Jesus wasn't fast enough for Judas. He didn't act quick enough for Judas. And Judas hated the Romans. And Jesus didn't hate the Romans. Jesus would sometimes help them. Judas didn't really approve of who Jesus let follow him, because who did Jesus let follow him? Anyone. And Judas actually thought that should be a little bit more condensed. That should be a little bit more filtered. That should be a little bit more exclusive. Judas thought that the people that should be Jesus' enemies, he thought Jesus was not handling himself well because the people that should be his enemies weren't. And the people that Jesus should be sucking up to try and get help, to get back into the power seat, Jesus was kind of mean to them. Well, he wasn't mean to them because Jesus isn't mean. But the religious, I said that wrong. The religious leaders were the people that Jesus would often rebuke. And Judas thought that actually, these are the people you should be making friends with, Jesus. We're going to need their help for political reasons. What are you doing? And there's a little Judas in all of us. We know that God has an agenda, and we have an agenda. What is our faith supposed to get us? We come to church sometimes, I think, I'm guilty of it, as a bit of a bargaining chip with God. See, God, I showed up. See, God, I put money in the offering. I'm serving. I'm doing this. I'm going here. When are you going to show up? I'm doing something for you. Are you doing something for me? We're trying to get the right recipe, If I do this, and if I do this, and if I do this, will you notice? Will you notice? Church attendance, tithing, serving in a ministry. We all start there. And at some point in following Jesus, it's true, and this is just part of the relationship. And I need you to hear me on this. Some point at following Jesus, when you're following Jesus, your agenda and his agenda for you are going to be in conflict. And that is a defining moment in your walk with him. At some point, your agenda and his are just not going to line up. And that will be a defining moment in your relationship with him. So here's the story. Toward the end of Jesus' ministry, there was just a little incident in a town called Bethany. And this might have been the straw that broke the camel's back for Judas. This is where Judas is at the intersection. Is he a fan or is he a follower? Is he going to follow or is he going to unfollow? So in Matthew 26, verse 6, that's where we're going to start today. Simon, who at one point had leprosy, this is where the story goes. Simon, who at one point get this, Simon had leprosy at one point, and Simon was healed from leprosy, but forever he is known as Simon the leper. That's a bit mean, don't you think? Well, not the nicest of nicknames. And then they're at Simon's house and they're eating a meal, and a woman comes in. And she has expensive perfume. And she pours the perfume over Jesus. And all of the disciples are kind of reclined around the table. And the disciples are indignant. They are like, this is wasteful. What is this woman doing? This money could have been used like in so many ways to solve so many problems. This is just like throwing money away. Now, if you think about what the disciples are saying here, think about this. You're invited out for dinner. And you get to the person's house, and these are the people that, like my grandma, who has a china cabinet. And it's filled with china that she really was only ever going to use if the Queen came to visit. You know, because we don't touch it. It's locked, and every now and then I get to dust it. Okay? So this is the beautiful, expensive china. And the house that you've gone to, they've set the table with this extravagant, expensive, beautiful china and their best silverware, cutlery, whatever you want to call it, and the crystal glasses. And they've used their finest, and they've set the table, and you look at it, and you say, what a waste. Do you know how much money is sitting on this table? Do you know what you could do with this money? And they've done this thing to honor you. And you see it as waste. This is what the disciples are kind of doing that day as they watch the woman pour extravagance onto Jesus. They're thinking, what a waste, what a waste. And here's the cool thing. John's account of this same story, this was Matthew's little account. In John's account of this same story, it brings out a little detail that Matthew's account leaves out. It says this, but Judas, the disciple who would soon betray him, said that perfume was worth a year's wages. It should have been sold and the money given to the poor. Not that he really cared about the poor. This is straight from the word of God. Not that he cared for the poor. He was a thief. And since he was in charge of the disciples' money, he often stole some for himself. Ironic. See, in John's account, it actually wasn't all of the disciples all at once simultaneously deciding that actually this is wrong. You know, they just were all indignant. It seems like it might have started with one of them going, oh, look at that, that's just so wasteful and blah, blah. And then the other one picking up on that, and then the other one picking up on that, and then all of them going, yeah, you're totally right. But why does somebody start talking like that in the first place? They generally have a bit of a motive. What's Judas's motive? He wants the money. He's got his own deal. So it's not about saying some kind of lofty, beautiful idea of, hey, let's give the money to the poor. He wanted to pocket some of it. See, Judas was the treasurer and the thief, and he honestly wasn't concerned about the poor. He wanted to make a little side donation to himself. And Judas is mastering the art of following Jesus and using Jesus to his advantage at the same time. But see, the thing about Jesus is Jesus knew the hearts of man. In fact, Jesus knew a little bit about you. I mean, you would have been a bit scared, don't you think? You would have been a bit scared to think even a question in your mind when Jesus was around, because it seems like when that happened in the crowds, Jesus would call that person out, just answer their question. They're thinking, what, did I say that out loud? And so if this is going on in Judas's mind, then Jesus is going to pick up on it. Jesus does. And he defends the woman. And he talks about how her act, she'd come to prepare him for burial. He just honored her. He says this, Jesus was aware of this and he replied, why criticize this woman for doing such a good thing to me? You will always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me. She's poured this perfume on me to prepare my body for burial. I tell you the truth. Wherever the good news is preached throughout the world, this woman's deeds will be remembered and discussed. And then in verse 14, there's this incredibly important word, then. Then. Because then indicates that this is the tipping point. This is the moment when it all changes. This is the game changer for Judas. Then Judas, one of the 12 disciples, went to the leading priest and he asked, how much will you pay me to betray Jesus to you? And they gave him 30 pieces of silver. And from that time on, Judas began looking for an opportunity to betray Jesus. Judas betrays Jesus. He has had a gutful. Jesus, if you're going to throw money away and allow those people to herald you as a special person, and then you're not going to do anything to conquer and overthrow the power, Jesus, if you're not going to act on my timeline in any way, then I'm done. I'm just going to play my hand here. I'm done waiting around for you. You're doing everything wrong. You're messing up the process. And at this point, I find myself wanting to ask Judas, dude, is Jesus enough? Was Jesus enough? And he goes to the powers and he says, you know what? I know where you can find Jesus. I know that you know how to find Jesus. Anytime you want to find Jesus, you find the biggest crowd and you're going to see him there. But the thing is in the crowd, they can't arrest him because then they're going to have a mob mentality. And so they're going to come up with opposition. And so they can't just go and arrest him while he's winning popularity with the crowd. And so Judas says, I know when he's alone. I'll give you the inside track. I can tell you how you can get to him. What are you willing to pay me? And from then on, it says, the word of God just said, Judas watched for an opportunity to hand him over. Judas is willing to trade on his relationship with Jesus. How many of us are willing to trade on our relationship with Jesus? He's trying to get the outcome he wants. He wants to set Jesus up. You know, I don't know about you, but I think the reason I had to take a deep breath before getting up here to share this message today is because I don't like that I have some similarities to Judas. I don't like it, but it's true. So I have to confront it. And then I'm talking to you about it. And it's this thing, it's this ick factor. There's this, really? Do I have to be like Judas? But how many times do I go, you know what, Jesus, if you do this, then I'll do this. Jesus, if I do this for you, will you do this for me? Jesus, if you give me, if I could just, Jesus, I promise I'll do this. You know? And even when we know better, we default there. And Jesus knows it. He loves us. We cannot lead a Roman Empire. We cannot lead a Roman Empire to him because that's already been done. We can't honestly do what Judas did. We can't honestly betray Jesus the way that Judas did, but we can betray him. We can. Don't you feel like saying, Judas, haven't you been paying attention, Judas? Do you not remember that day, Judas, that you thought you were going to drown and you woke Jesus up and he spoke to the weather? Judas, do you remember the day? Do you remember the day that you were standing there and Jesus bent down and he picked up mud and he put it on somebody's eyes and they could see? Judas, do you remember the day that he touched the lame and they walked again? Judas, do you remember when Lazarus' family was all freaking out because he was really dead? He was really dead. And Jesus was about to open the tomb and the family's like, don't even do it. And Jesus called forth a dead man from the tomb. Judas, were you not paying attention? Were you not paying attention? And you think, Judas, that you have the capacity and the ability to hand him over? Seriously? Seriously? Like you could do that? Sometimes when you think about, the way that we pray, the way we work God into our conveniences and into our schedules, and he becomes a little bit like a Santa Claus God. You know what I mean? Where we come to him with our wish list. Or a little bit like a hip pocket God. A God that I take out when it serves me really, really well. God, I'm not going to take you on this holiday with me, but I'm going to hope that you're going to be there on the way back. God, I don't want to take you on this business trip with me, but when it's time for me to close the deal, please just be sitting by my side, whispering in my ear. God, I'm not going to take you to this party, but if I feel really bad in the morning when I wake up, could you be there with me then? God, I'm not, God, I don't need you right now, but my kids are having some struggles, so if you could just pay all your attention to them. God, what might really disturb us greatly about this is that God doesn't even exist, because that is not who God is. That God, the God that people decide not to believe in because they're asking the question, how could you, God? Or why would you, God? Or where were you, God? That kind of question type God, that God doesn't actually even exist in the Old Testament or the New Testament. Bad things happen to good people, even in the Bible. That's not Jesus God. That's hip pocket God. That's Santa Claus God. That's the God that we've molded into an image that simply isn't true. That's not follower God. That's fan God. And for Judas, his God is not any larger than that. Jesus really isn't enough for him because he thinks he can hand him over. He thinks his God can be manipulated. So we wrestle with the fact that Judas, he had an advantage over us. He actually hung out with Jesus every single day. And he's following him sometimes, and he's unfollowing him. How is it that he doesn't get this? How is it that he doesn't know this? How is it that Judas doesn't understand this of all people? And we can think about Judas really harshly, and we can write him off as inherently evil. We can think to ourselves, you know what, Judas always was bad. He always had a bad intention. He was always plotting to kill Jesus. But actually, what if that's not entirely true? What if, in fact, the reason for the downward spiral wasn't the ultimate evil intention of Jesus' death? What if Judas never actually set out for Jesus to die, but just a sidestep at the intersection of his agenda and God's? What if it was just a sidestep? What if Judas didn't have the end result in mind at all? I mean, he knew Jewish law. What if he wasn't expecting that Jesus would be arrested and killed? What if he was just expecting that he would be arrested and tried, and then Jesus, the Jesus that he knew him to be, that had escaped arrest thousands of times before, not thousands of times, I'm just elaborating, but a few times before, he'd seen evidence that Jesus could not be tricked by them. What if he was thinking that Jesus would at that moment just be God and just be powerful, and then everybody would see who he is, and then the Jews would be in power and they would conquer all of the land? What if that's what he was thinking? What if he just was what if he was just speeding up the process? What if he was just expediting the process, helping Jesus unfold the plan? What if Judas's error was greed? What if it was just about the money? What if Judas's weakness was his own power? What if Judas's mind was just when Jesus makes it to the top, I'm going to be there with him. I just want to make it there with him. What if his agenda was entirely political? What if Judas's mistake was not following Jesus, but helping Jesus to help him get what he wanted? What if Jesus was just a means to an end? What if Judas wasn't expecting the worst to happen? Can we relate to any of those motives? What if it just went pear-shaped? Can you relate to, I'm just sick of waiting, God. Let me help you help me. Let me help you help me. What if Jesus just wasn't enough for him? So during Passover, he hears that Jesus is going to pray, and he slips out of dinner early, and he tells his people. So Jesus is arrested, and you know what? All of the disciples, all of them leave, and so does Judas. And in Matthew 27:1, it all goes pear-shaped. Jesus isn't tried by the Jewish law as Judas might have thought and expected. This is where things really fall apart for Judas. Verse 2. And the next thing he knows, Rome will determine Jesus' fate. This was out of control. This was out of Judas' hands. And in Matthew 27, verse 3, Judas feels bad. He feels bad. It seems like maybe this is an indication that things have gotten out of hand, even beyond what Judas wanted it to, because he feels bad. And he gives the money back, and he makes a confession. It's as if he never intended for this to happen. But you know what? You and I know, and Judas is learning, that we cannot unmake decisions we have made. And Judas is learning that the hard way. He is dealing here with the circumstances and consequences that have spiraled out of control. And in verse 5, after making decisions that are difficult to live with, he took his own life. And he hasn't even waited around to see what happens next. So Judas is gone. Judas is gone. Jesus has been arrested. Jesus is tried. Jesus is crucified. And then Jesus dies. And in this crazy, strange, unique, Hollywood kind of way, Judas is trying to force his will. Judas, by staying focused on his own story and agenda, becomes this accidental player in the story of your salvation and in the story of mine. And God's will is actually accomplished through his horrible decision. And God's plan actually unfolded as a result of the decision Judas made to betray Jesus. How strange. It's as if God is enough. It's as if Jesus is enough all along. So what does that have to do with you? And what does that have to do with me? When we begin following Jesus, we start like this, with our fists closed. I have a plan, and I am hanging on to it. Will you help me? I'm curious about you, Jesus. Or let me see what I can get out of this, Jesus. Or I have a will, and I like to think that your will and my will are lined up. But if not, my will be done. Okay? And along the way, as we follow Jesus, our fingers may begin to be pried open as we realize there's a conflict between my will and thy will. And it's in that conflict that we learn about ourselves. It's at that intersection we ask ourselves, is Jesus enough? And it's in that conflict that we might relate to Judas a little bit, because there are competing agendas. There's my way and there's God's way. And you know what? That's what happens when we follow. That is what happens when we follow, because being followers of Jesus does not disqualify us from the human condition, the human reality. And when this happens, and if you've been following for a while, you're going to know this to be true. When this happens, certain decisions are going to come your way, and they may appear really insignificant to somebody else. The other person might just be saying, hurry up and make a decision. But do you know what? To you, those decisions are going to feel like some kind of moral imperative. They are going to feel important. There's going to be decisions like, I need to stay and not go. Or I need to go and not stay. I need to wait and not move. I need to let go instead of hanging on, or I need to hang on instead of letting go. This is an opportunity you should say yes to, Keira, or this is, even though you don't want to. And this is one you should say no to, even though you really, really, really want it. Those kinds of decisions where other people might look on and just go, just decide already. You know that there's a reason that you're laboring over it, because it's inside of you. It's your will and God's will, and they're a little bit in conflict. And you're just trying to muck that out. You're just trying to take another step. You're just trying to figure it out because you want to follow. And that's what happens when we follow. And we need to start to pay attention to that, because we'll start to make our decisions differently. That's what will happen. And you know what, church? Here's some good news. You don't have to worry and you don't have to fear it, because it will ultimately be a defining moment for you. You will have to experience this as a follower. If you are following, you will have these intersections, these moments. You will have to. And it might not be awesome sometimes, but you won't have to fear it, because it's in those moments you discover whose you are and who you're following. You discover, I belong to him. In those moments, you discover that I've moved from a simple consumer or a fan to a follower. In those moments, there's this free fall, and you just have to trust that God's going to catch you. You just have to trust he's going to hold out his arms and catch you. It's in those tiny amounts, your tiny amount of faith intersects with God's faithfulness, and God becomes alive in you in those moments. It's in those moments that you realize, you know what? Jesus really is enough for me. And I'm going to take the unfollow option off the table, off the computer screen, off wherever it is. I'm just going to take it away. It's out of my mind. And so this is what we say to him in those moments. We say, I want you more. I want you more. And if we're not quite there yet, because that's a pretty big statement, we can say this: I want to want you more. I don't. My will and your will are at conflict here. I don't want what you want, but I really want to want it. You know, and I know that sounds really wordy, but sometimes that's the best we can do. And if you need a little bit more wiggle room, church, if you're still quite not there, maybe you could say this: I want to want what you want more than I want what I want. And you know what? That's enough for God, because that's a little step. That's just a little step. And at that intersection, at that particular moment, that's enough. Just own it. I want to want what you want more than I want what I want. You know what? We see examples of this. We see examples of this in people we admire. I don't know if you have people you admire, you know, and they hit this intersection and they give something up. And we think, oh, whoa, how could they do that? Man, I want to be like that. I want to be able to do that. We see people that fight for their marriage And we actually wonder why. Why are you fighting for your marriage? But then we kind of admire their audacity and their strength, and we wish we had what they had. We admire that. We think, wow, I don't know if I could do that. I would hope that if I was in that situation, I might choose what they chose. Those people that we admire, I wish I could do what they're doing. We see people do acts that we would consider heroic, like rescuing sex slaves or truly pouring themselves out, their time and their resources into a cause. And we think, man, I want to make a difference like that. Wow, I wish I could do that. That's the feeling of I want to want that. You're recognizing in yourself that you don't. You look at it and go, I don't think I could do that. But I really wish that I could. I really wish that I would have the capacity to do the thing that I admire. When you find yourself in this situation, believers, followers, seekers, curious people about God, when you find yourself in this situation as a follower of Jesus, don't freak out and hit the unfollow button. Just ask Jesus to just take a seat. Hit the pause button. Just own a version of that phrase and just sit with it. If all you can say is, I want to want what you want, just say it. I don't. Your will and my will, God, they are clashing right now, and I want to win. I want to win, but I want to want what you want. And if we could just take a moment and sit and just go, okay, I don't. I'm being rebellious, but I want to want what you want for me, God, because I know you're enough. I know your ways are higher than my ways. I know it. And you know what? If we sit there long enough in that moment, when we're owning this, you might feel your fingers start to be pried open. You might let go just a little bit. He doesn't want you to miss out. He loves you. It's not that he'd let you have your will. Jesus didn't stop Judas from doing what Judas intended to do. Judas still did it. But Judas did not stop Jesus from doing what Jesus needed to do. And I think the same applies to us. And maybe this would just inspire our hands open. Maybe this would allow us to surrender a little bit. I don't know. Maybe if Judas was here today, maybe Judas might say this: blessed is the one who chooses to do the will of God rather than attempting to oppose his own will onto God. You cannot force the hand of God, which is good. It makes him worthy of our worship. God's God. It means no matter how intelligent you are, no matter how clever you are, we can't manipulate God because he loves you. He says to us, I've invited you into more than just your small story. I've invited you into my big story that will make your story significant. I'm going to make your story more significant than the story you would pick for yourself. That's the moment when we look back, and that's when we realize that it was in that moment God was real to me. That's when he showed up. That's the moment when it was clear to me. And you know what? I almost missed it. I almost missed it because I wanted my version of it more. Maybe we can be like the woman with the perfume. Maybe our worship, our extravagance will leave just a legacy for thousands of years. If that is who God is, church, if that is who God is, then let's just follow. Let's just follow him. One step at a time. One intersection at a time. Because he is enough. Jesus is enough. Christ is enough. He's enough. Do you believe it? I don't want to end today without an opportunity for worship. Like the woman with the perfume kind of worship. You might have several versions of this phrase going through your head. I don't know if you identify with the I want what you want more. If that's you today, then you can declare that in your worship. That's cool. Maybe you're sitting with the idea of I want to want what you want more. Just say that. Or maybe you're even a step further back, but you're saying I want to want what you want more than I want what I want. And we're just going to invite you into this time and space to do that. We've been singing this song through our series. It says the words, Christ is enough. So if they're true to you, you can sing them with conviction. It says, I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back. But can I tell you what I've learned in my journey? And I'm just a baby on my journey, really. But what I've learned is sometimes even when I'm not feeling it with my feelings, if my mind decides, if I choose to declare it, then often, you know what, the rest of my life just follows suit. Because we don't have to feel it to know it. And sometimes when we choose and when we declare, that's when the rest of your life and your heart and your emotions, they just line up and you start to walk and you didn't realize it could happen, but you chose it. So we're going to sing, we're going to worship, and this is a time for you to connect with God, however is real for you to connect with God. Why don't you stand and we'll sing together? Christ,